Welcome to Seveso. There are two things we're going to do here. First, I'm going to talk to you about why this is important, why it's an important place, as the site of one of Europe's first big industrial disasters. And the second thing we're going to do, the main thing for us as botanists, is we're going to look at what they did to recover the area after the disaster and the result you can see around you, which is the oak woodland. So, firstly, this is the Seveso and Meda oak woodland. Il Bosco delle Querce di Seveso e Meda. Okay, Seveso e Meda. Seveso and Meda. There are two towns involved here. Seveso, which is this town we have behind us, and Meda, which is just towards the north. Now, the disaster actually happened in Meda, but the disaster is called the Seveso Disaster because the result of the disaster happened in the town of Seveso. Why? Because in Meda, in a factory owned by 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗱, 𝗺ście chimiche Meda società azionaria. Okay, 𝗵𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗱. The Me part of that stands for Meda, for the town, and the factory there was producing chemicals that are used in antiseptics and insecticides, a chemical called trichlorophenol. And what happened was that on a Friday evening, on the 9th of July 1976, they had to shut down the chemical processes because there's a law, or there was a law in Italy at that time, where at the weekend there couldn't be any industrial processes happening, so they had to switch it off. The problem is that they left it not completely finished, and some of those chemical reactions carried on during the Friday evening, and it meant that just after midnight on the 10th, on the Saturday morning, the heat built up in this tank, and the trichlorophenol was reacting with itself, and it produced what we call a dioxin, to be precise. I'll say this once because I'm probably going to get it wrong, and then we'll just call it dioxin, but the chemical name is 2,3,7,8 tetrachloro-dibenzodioxin, or TCDD. Okay, if you want to write that down, I'll write it down for you later. Okay, we'll just call it dioxin. But what happened is the temperature and the pressure built up, and then, of course, there are safety features, and one of these safety features is a big valve that opens and releases everything into the environment. So simply, the pressure built up, and 6 tons of material just went up into the atmosphere. And about probably 15 to 30 kilograms of that material was dioxin. Now, that happened in Meda, where now there's a sports center and a playing field, okay? Usually the wind in this part of Italy is southwesterly. So wind is named from whence it came. So the wind usually comes from this direction and blows that way. But on that day, that particular day, the wind was going in this direction. Okay, it was a northwesterly wind blowing towards the southeast, which is down there. So from the chemical factory over there, this cloud of dioxin basically spread out in a plume, in a triangle. And there are 3 zones where it landed. We're in the zone A, which is the main zone where this stuff landed, okay? Then there's the zone B and zone C as we go further and further out. But this is actually the place where there was a town, there were buildings right here, there were families living here, okay? And they got covered in this dioxin, and only about 15 days later were they all evacuated, and they had a medical condition which we call chloracne, which is basically pustules on the skin. This dioxin is very toxic, it gets into the cells and destroys them. It's a very persistent chemical. So after the accident, people were evacuated. Everyone in northern Italy was scared, including my wife. That we talked about this in the car. She lived in Serrano. She was on holiday, and her father rang to say, stay away from this area. Everyone was really scared. So here for many years, actually, they didn't really know what to do with this dioxin. Really persistent. And what they did initially was to put a fence all the way around, like really sealing the area, something that wouldn't let the wind pass, and so this dioxin was sitting on the surface for years. And then they started to take away the material, the soil. They took away 90 centimeters depth of soil. They did it in 3 lots of 30 centimeters, and they took away everything. Okay, the buildings were demolished, and there are 2 containment tanks, basically. On this map that we have, this is the map of the Zone A, where now we have the woodland, but this was actually the main contaminated area. You can see 2 small photographs of the containment tanks, which are still there, or the material from the buildings is still underground. And there's a network of, let's say, little holes going down to check the water underground and to check everything around here and to check that the dioxins aren't leaking out. And the material that was sealed into these tanks, basically it was wrapped up in polyethylene, in plastic, and you can actually go underneath and collect the water from underneath and see if it's got dioxin in, and they check it to see if the dioxin's coming out. But much of the material is still in these 2 tanks. But the soil that was here in the various parks and gardens in this area, that was sealed into barrels, into steel barrels, and it was just taken somewhere. And eventually, I think after about 12 years or so, somebody realized that they were in Paris, these barrels, and then they realized what it was, and then they had to get rid of this stuff. So they eventually ended up taking it to Switzerland, where it was incinerated at high temperature, so that destroyed the organic molecules that were in it. So what they had here was basically a big scar in the landscape. They had a choice to make, which is, what do we do with this now? And one idea was, it's the site of an industrial disaster. We now know how to deal with this kind of problem. Why don't we make it a center for dealing with dioxins and dangerous chemicals? We'll put an incinerator here so we can burn these chemicals and get rid of them. Why don't we do that? And the people of Seveso said, well, that would mean that we have lorries coming from all over Europe with the worst stuff possible that industry produces. We don't want Seveso to become a center for industrial pollutants. We'd rather have a park. So they decided to make this park. In 1985, 𝗧𝗵, ente regionale al servizio dell'agricoltura e alle foreste. I don't really know how to translate it. It's the regional body for services for agriculture and the forests. Who manage this now? They have 2 people that go around and cut things. I met them the other day, actually. Very nice people. In 1985, they started a campaign of putting trees, and they put 5,000 trees in total over a 2-year period. Partly because the winter of 1985 was extremely hard. It was very cold, and about 50%, 60% of the trees actually died off in the winter. So this place is basically, it's not a forest. You should think of it more as an urban park, where they planted lots and lots of different species that they kind of reflect the species that we might find in the lowland plains of northern Italy. Not all of them, as we'll see, and in fact some of the species that they planted really shouldn't be here. But anyway, it's better than an incinerator, okay? But think of it as an urban park more than anything else. So what I've given you is a list of the species that they planted, okay? And these are all trees, because 𝗧𝗵 just planted trees. Actually, there was one tree, one single individual tree, which survived and which they kept, and we'll see that later. It's a poplar. It's down a path that way, and it's a huge tree. We'll see that later. It's the single plant that survived at this place. 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀 trees, all the trees that you can see on the list, but they just put trees. And the idea was to create a zone which is actually behind us over here, which was a bit more natural, not just an urban park, but something more like a woodland. So the part that we're in now is a park, but the part over there is the naturalistic area. And the idea there was to create something more like a real woodland. And so in 1984, there was a survey done of the understorey species, the species in the grasslands as well. And they found, I think, 185 species that weren't planted, that have come on their own. Just after the year 2000, the Native Flora Centre of the Lombardy region, the place that we went to the other day, was involved in restocking the understory. So that's about herbaceous plants. The idea was to make an understory with typical herbaceous species. Now in 2003 and 2004 they resurveyed this area and they found 235 species. So in the 10 years since the survey in the 1990s, it actually gained about 50 species. And that's really interesting because it says that species will come on their own. So if you recreate an environment, many species will come on their own. But the idea is that some species have difficulty getting here on their own. The way that their seeds are dispersed means that they travel short distances. Now we're in an urban context, so we have the town of Seveso over there, the town of Meda, and you can probably hear the main road. It's not exactly a highway, but it's a big fast road that gives a kind of absolute limit to the park on that side. And then there's a road across the southern border, so it's really cut off, and that means that there are some plants that won't get here on their own, especially characteristic species of the understory. For example, the periwinkle that we keep seeing, that has tiny seeds that just fall in place, and that's not going to travel on its own. So there were 8 species that were put back by the Centro Flora Autoctona, by the Native Flora Centre. Later on we'll be seeing some of these. But for now I think what we're going to do is try and identify some of the trees. So I've given you a list. The aim for today, your homework for today, I can't call it homework because we're not at home anyway. The aim for today is to find all these trees. I don't think we will, but it's a treasure hunt. It's supposed to be fun. But the idea is that I'm not going to tell you anything. I'm not going to teach you anything. You're going to go up to each tree, get the leaves in your hands, touch the bark, have a look at it, think about what you've learned before today, and you're going to tick off the tree and ask me if it's correct. And I'm going to say yes or no. That's all I'm going to say today. Okay? You tell me why you think it is that tree, and I'll say yes or no. But I'm not going to teach you today. You're going to do it yourselves. Okay. So, what can we see around us?
There's a 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝘀𝗀𝗃 australis here.
𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗃 australis. So why do you think that this tree behind us is 𝗧𝗵𝗃 australis? Can I put the camera on you?
Because it has 3 veins at the base of the leaf, and it looks like a narrow leaf, and the fruit looks like cherries.
Tiny green cherry. Yeah.
Cherries.
And the other characteristic is the
bark.
The bark.
And again, the leaf is serrated, tooth margin.
Okay, so you have a list of characteristics, and they all fit 𝗧𝗵𝗃 australis. So yes, here's 𝗧𝗵𝗃 australis, and if you look amongst all of the other trees, you'll see that many of them are very different. That, for example, that tree there is different from this one. Again, I'm not going to tell you what they are. You go and have a look and tell me what they are. But don't forget the peduncular oak. The peduncle is on the fruits, and the leaves don't have the peduncle. So if the leaf has a peduncle like this, it's not 𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. I said I wasn't going to say anything, but it's not 𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗃. It's not called the other one.
Yeah.
It has a name, and a big clue is it's not actually on the list. You know why it's not on the list? Because when they planted these trees, they got trees from nurseries all around and put them in, and they generally checked what they were. But when it comes to Quercus, the official list of species that they put, they just write Quercus species. And we'll see later on that one of these is actually Quercus rubra, the American oak as well. So actually on the official list, the species aren't specified. But I can tell you this is a native species. It is the one that seems like the peduncular oak, but it's not, which I said was Quercus 𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀. Okay, good. But next to it, what's that? So you say you know it's an Asa, but why do you know? What gives you that certainty?
The leaf.
What about the leaf?
They're palmate.
Palmate leaves. And I said that with Asa there was another characteristic of the leaves. Because around about here we have another tree which is called the plane tree, which has very similar leaves. They're palmate leaves, but it has two things that are different from a maple. And the other piece. Two leaves together. Pair of leaves. Okay? And at the base of the leaf there's nothing. There's just a bud. But some other trees have a stipule, which is this kind of ear-shaped tissue. Looks a bit like leaf tissue around the base. So the fact that it's a maple, you can see that in a pair of leaves. These leaves are pretty small and they're rounded. More than anything else, they're rounded. So it's a field maple. 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝘀𝗀𝗃 campestre, yes. I'm not going to speak, you do it, okay? I've given you some big clues here, but now you do it.
Carpinus.
Yeah, so why do you say it's Carpinus?
Well, at first I thought it, from far, I thought it was a 𝗵𝗵𝗃, but it doesn't have the typical ear of a 𝗵𝗵𝗃, and it's not as curved and deep veined as a 𝗵𝗵𝗃. So the leaf has toothed margin, typical of a Carpinus.
Typical because that toothiness is a particular kind of toothiness.
It's double serration.
Okay, small teeth on big teeth. Okay, which we also see in the elms, but the elms have an asymmetrical base, and this does not. Okay. Look up. Look directly up. Okay. So. The bract and the inflorescence hanging from the bract is characteristic of 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. And then these fruits are very young, but if you look carefully, very carefully, because they are small and young, you'll see, maybe I'm shaking a bit because I'm getting old, but if you look at it carefully, you'll see that there's like a star shape. There are 5 ribs around the edge of the fruit. That's a characteristic of 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃. 𝗺𝗃𝗃𝗃 doesn't have that, they're just perfectly spherical. So that's the confirmation that this is definitely 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃.
The majority of
they're big. If you had 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 next to this, you'd really see the difference. But they're big. I mean, look at these leaves down here. Look, take a sample from the whole tree. Most of these leaves are really massive. So big heart-shaped leaves, cylindrical stalks, peduncles, and then these very specialized fruits, or I should say infructescence, so a group of fruits. It's definitely 𝗃𝗵𝗵𝘀𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗵𝗵𝗀, don't mistake it for anything else. Do you see any fruits? If somebody says, do you see the fruits? And they're standing there looking at a particular branch, then go to where they're standing and where they're looking. So they're small and they come off kind of straight. So the sycamore, for example, they come down and they're big, they're much bigger than this, and they come down. The field maple is tiny and cute, and the fruits are straight. So this whole thing is the 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗃𝗃𝗃. Schizo because it fragments, 𝗃 meaning fruit, so a fragmenting fruit. And each single half is called a 𝗵𝗵𝗃. And when it's dry, that's the bit that will float off like a helicopter, but it's too young at the moment to do that. So that's the 𝗧𝗵𝗃𝗃 and two 𝗵𝗵𝗃s of 𝗃𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗃. So you said
Querce di Seveso.
why?
Because it doesn't have a botanical name.
No, wait a minute. Remember that Querce di Seveso has the peduncle on the leaf, and it doesn't have it on the fruits. Okay. So it's not Querce di Seveso, because here the leaves are going directly into the stem. There's a tiny peduncle, but they're basically going into the stem. And the base of the leaf is kind of elegant as well. It just goes in there. That's it.
So rubber has the peduncle on the fruit, but not on the leaf, and then the other fruit.
So say the name. I need you to say it. This is
Quercus robur.
Quercus robur. Good. Okay, tick it off. Cross it off the list. You have identified Quercus robur. With a bit of
help.
So until now we've been walking around really in the park area, okay, which was always open to the public. It's always been used to walk dogs and as an urban park. But behind me is the naturalistic area, which until recently, I think about 4 or 5 years ago, it was literally closed off and you couldn't go in. I've been involved in projects to help restore the understory. Not my projects, I should say, I've just helped a little bit. So there was a time when you had to ask permission to go in, and you had to have a key and go in. So it's very different in there with respect to what we've just seen. What we've just seen is like a zoo with different species, one next to the other, okay, especially around the entrance. But as we go in, we'll see that it's more, it looks like a woodland, but it's not really, because it's a mixture of species that doesn't really occur in nature. So I still think of it as a park, but it's closer to nature. And what you'll see is that there are groups of species. Like here we have the 𝗃𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. There's a big group here, and as we go in, then we'll find a big group of oaks. You have to tell me which species, but there'll be a big group of oaks, and we go in, and so it's almost like they were planted in groups, not in a very natural way. And then in the past, nothing was done with the understory. We can see that the understory is growing up. They do come in and cut it as well. But the idea with restoring the understory was to put these key species back in there, and then to help it get going. So what we're going to do is we're going to follow this path right the way in. And again, I want you to identify the trees, but it will be a bit different. And this time, just have in the back of your mind invasive species. So what are we looking at here? Why do I think this is important? Tell me what species it is.
Maple.
𝗃𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗵𝗃, but look at it. Is that a tree that somebody's planted? Spontaneous growth, and there are lots of small plants. So this is showing that the field maple is spreading around on its own. So this is a natural process. This isn't planted. This is the woodland. Well, it's now becoming more like a natural woodland. and it's regenerating on its own. So field maples really get around with these little flying seeds. So that's a natural woodland regeneration process. So in woodlands like this, one thing that you might expect to find in the understory are wild strawberries. And in fact, one of the species that the Native Flora Centre put down as part of the requalification work was wild strawberries. But you tell me what we're seeing here. Why am I talking in a negative way about this? What's wrong about this? I'll give you a clue. We've seen this plant at the Botanic Gardens on the first day. We talked about it on Friday. Is it a strawberry?
It's fake one.
We can't see the flowers, but remember Professor Spada said about the fruit.
It's upright.
It's upright.
Yeah.
The fruits are upright, so this is not.
Strawberry.
It's not strawberry. It's not Fragaria vesca. It's 𝗬𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗶𝘀𝗀 indica, Potentilla indica. It's a species that's changed its name a lot. I talked about Potentilla indica.
So this one was not planted?
No, it's not planted. This has arrived on its own. So unfortunately, it's not the native true strawberry. Indica, I think, means from Asia, if I'm not wrong. Your homework is to find out what indica means and where Potentilla indica or 𝗬𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗀 indica comes from. I'm just going to stop you there because I've seen an invasive species. This is going to be hard to spot though. I don't think you'll get it, so I'm going to show you where it is. If you could reach down on your left on the ground, there are some leaves which are divided and they have like 5 leaflets. Could you get one in your hands? You see that it's attached to like a stem. Pull the whole thing up, the whole stem, the whole thing. Just give that a pull, pull it up. Now follow that off into the woodland. Pull it all up and follow it, see where it goes.
But it's...
Okay, you don't really have to follow it all the way through the woodland. The point is, this is actually a climbing plant. It's in the 𝗵𝗵𝗃 family, the family of the grapevine. And it's an American species that really should not be here. It's arrived with birds that eat the berries, and then let's say the berries are excreted, and it grows everywhere. This is 𝗵𝗵𝗃 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and it's if you look at some buildings and they're covered in a red vine with these palmate leaves, that's what it is, and that's actually invading here. So it's spreading all through the floor of the woodland. We can see it over there, for example, and it's going everywhere. And then it'll cover a tree. In fact, I should have looked up. Yeah, it's covering this tree here, and that will completely cover it. I saw it on the ground, but I should have been looking at the trees actually. Yeah, so this is a field maple, and it's just covering the field maple.
What is it called? You said 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃?
𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. It's a horrible name. You can look it up.
5 leaves.
Yeah, because, well, it's one leaf that has 5 leaflets, but the name is basically saying 5 leaves, yeah. 𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. Okay, you're doing your bit for the environment by destroying an invasive species. Well done. Okay, I'm just going to stop you here because this is kind of interesting. We talked about the natural regeneration of the field maple before, and the fact that field maple was coming up. And some of this is field maple, 𝗧𝗵𝗵𝗃 campestre. But look at the leaves on this. These are very different.
Yeah, these are campestre.
These are either like maple or sycamore.
So the black one?
Okay, so your thinking is that it's an 𝗧𝗃 because it has palmate leaves which are in pairs. Correct. Okay. And you said pseudoplatanus, but pseudoplatanus, the leaves are kind of rounded. They're big like this, but they're not quite so spiky looking. This has very definite straight edges and spikes on the lobes. So I'm not sure if it's on the list actually.
No,
This,
Wasser, we only have this.
okay, so
It's maple?
it's
Like maple, like maple leaf.
yeah.
No.
No, not 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀. 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀, I don't think we'd find it here. We saw it at the Botanic Gardens, but we wouldn't find it here. This is 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃 platanoides. So the pseudoplatanus, like the false plane, and there's platanoides, which means it has the form of a plane tree. Later we'll see a plane tree and I'll show you what I mean, because near the car park there's a big plane tree. So the two maples, the two big maples, they actually have a similar name, which means a similar thing. The false plane and the plane-like maple. And this is the plane-like maple, platanoides.
Native species as well?
This is native, and it's nice to see it regenerating here.
Ah, I found another.
You found a what?
It's 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 sylvatica.
Okay. Quite right. Now why? Why?
Because the wavy leaf, and then there's this hair at the tips.
Okay. If I get a chance to show you the fruits, we'll look at the fruits as well, but you're getting it. Good, good, excellent.
So tiny.
Can you tell me what that big tree is in front of you? Okay, well done. She has picked up a leaf from the floor. If you can't get to the leaves, they come to you.
Scary.
Hairy leaf, so it is. Say it loud. 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 sylvatica, okay. Beech tree. I actually want to go off to the left here, because I know there's something interesting over here, apart from the mud.
And this kind of structure is typical of 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃.
Okay, this structure where it's coming up from the base.
Yeah.
Remember I talked about the difference between a tree and a bush, and that bushes come up from the base. This is actually a characteristic of the form of this species, and it's a typical species that I'm glad we're starting to see here. Ignore the leaves at the bottom, which are 𝗺𝗵𝗵𝗃, okay? So they're the invasive species, but these bigger leaves here, have a good look at them. Bear in mind, it's not a tree, it's a bush.
Do you see this?
No, it's a fly. It's a fly.
What?
There's a fly.
It has really large, round leaves. It has this little point at the apex.
Yeah.
And tell me about the edge of the leaf.
It's doubly serrated.
Yeah.
Serration.
Double serrated. So which families have a double serrated edge to the leaf?
𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃.
𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 is in which family? It's called 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃
𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃.
𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃. This is a characteristic of the 𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, and it's a shrub, it's not a tree, and it's a particular species that's found in the understory all throughout Europe. And I have talked about it before, but I think I'm going to have to tell you. It is Corylus avellana, which is the hazelnut, il nocciolo. You were going to get there, okay, okay. I'll go a bit slower next time.
The one we saw right before the Orto Botanico di Brera.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. You said it's called?
What's the name?
Corylus avellana.
And it's a bush.
It's a bush,
Not a tree.
because it grows sympodially from the base and not monopodially with one single axis. And this is
trees can have the same type of growth when they're
When they're cut, yeah. Or they can start branching eventually, or they have some branches from the bottom, but bushes really branch from the bottom, and they don't tend to get very tall. So this is actually really big for a hazelnut. This is really big.
That's Quercus. I'm not able to tell. It's 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗀.
So why do you say it's Quercus?
The shape of the leaves.
The shape of the leaves, but
palmated leaves.
well, they're not palmate, they're lobed. Okay, palmate means that it.
Oh yeah, that's.
Yeah, you get it.
Lobe. Yeah.
Okay, they're lobed. But look, that's a really big tree, and those leaves are really far away, and you can see them really well because they're absolutely massive leaves. And that's actually not like Quercus robur or Quercus 𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗃.
Oh, you see some red.
You see some red.
So red oak, Quercus rubra.
Quercus rubra. Well done.
Yeah, I couldn't see them.
So
So one of the characteristics of Quercus rubra compared to the other ones is that it has bigger size leaves as well.
it has big leaves. They're kind of pointy on the lobes. You said that there's some red up there. In fact, the young leaves are red. The other characteristics are to do with the bark. It has a very particular kind of pattern on the bark. There are these strips running up and down, and they have a bit of colour in them. Even the bark, the cracks in the bark are kind of red.
And the same goes for the left.
And the tree on the left is like that as well. The other thing is, what do we have down here?
We have Quercus rubra growing.
We have Quercus rubra growing. And if we go in here, if we don't get spiked by the brambles or the crataegus, you can see that in there it's just full of seedlings of Quercus rubra. Okay, so we have two big plants of Quercus rubra with lots of seedlings underneath them. So here you can see the problem. It produces these large fruits that fall to the ground, and at least locally, especially underneath the trees, it spreads around. And you have this kind of dense understory of seedlings. And the other thing is that in the winter, you have lots of dead leaves all over the place, and they're very thick, leathery leaves, and they just cover everything and nothing else can grow. So it's really taking over here.
But in this case, no one planted it.
It was planted.
Oh, it was planted.
It was planted. All of the trees of a certain size here were planted. So apart from the seedlings which are coming up, the saplings, everything that big was planted. So when they talk about the oak woodland, the Seveso and Meda oak woodland, and they don't tell you the exact list of oaks that were planted, it's because some of them actually shouldn't have been planted. And you have to think of it like this. They had an environmental emergency. They needed to make a park, they needed to recover the land, and this was the 1970s and 1980s. They didn't necessarily have the material available like we do now. So they had to get everything that they could with some urgency and put it down. So they basically went to all of the nurseries around about and bought all of the trees. And in there, of course, are trees for ornamental situations, one of which is the red oak.
But is there an ongoing project for removing the seedlings of the red oak?
Well, the workers of 𝗧𝗵𝗶𝘀𝗃 do come in and cut, and we've actually talked about this. We talked about it the other week. So they know the problem. There are areas where they've actually cut it, and they're perfectly aware of what's happening. And I said that it spreads, but it's a kind of local spread. So they know about this patch, for example. We were literally here talking about this, and they keep an eye on it. So it's not like some of the other invasive species like 𝗰𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗃 or the tree of heaven, 𝗺𝗺𝗪𝗃 𝗺𝗪𝗪𝗃, which really spreads across the landscape. So long as they know that it's here and they keep an eye on it, it's okay. And one of the workers actually made a very good point about this. If you just go and cut all of them, you leave massive holes in the canopy and it changes the character of the woodland. So at the moment they're kind of shading some of the other trees, and they're actually helping some of them so that they don't get too dry basically in the summer. So the idea is to cut some of these big red oaks periodically. Like every 10 years you come and cut a big tree and the woodland regenerates underneath it, and then you cut another one. So we talked about this, about how to manage this problem, and I think that was a really good idea the guy had, just to cut some periodically. So, Querce rubra, you identified it. How about this tree we're walking under on the right? Don't forget that one of the clues for identifying a plant is to look at the other botanists and see what they're doing.
Lenticels.
Ah, you've seen lenticels?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's kind of rough, dark bark with lenticels, which you've just identified. And take a look at the leaf. You said the magic word? Prunus. So to tell which one, we need to see the fruits, which I don't see, but it's... Ah, no, I do. I can see a fruit way up there. And I can see one single fruit hanging down, and because it's hanging down... Yeah.
Oh,
So,
there as well?
yeah, there are a few. So that's Prunus avium. Prunus avium. So we're walking along the southern edge, and this is actually not just the southern edge of the oak forest, but it's also the southern edge of zone A, the main contaminated zone. And what we can see where we have the buildings, the houses, and they're setting up a fairground so that children can come and play, that's zone B, where they didn't take the soil away, and there is actually dioxin still in the soil at very, very small concentrations. But in order to do any kind of activity on that land, such as maybe playing with children with a fairground, you have to get a permit, because any disturbance on that soil can kick dioxins up into the atmosphere again. Now the concentration isn't very high, but
Agricultural activity is not
permitted. Well, I don't think there's really much agriculture right here. It's an urban zone, and there are factories. And for example, there have been some factories that try to get planning permission, and that requires a special permit because you're disturbing the land. When I came here in 2004, so 20 years ago, we were checking on the plants that the Native Flora Centre had put down, and also the spontaneous plants that had come on their own. And I noticed one particular plant, and because I'm a specialist on orchids, I recognised that even though there were no flowers, and right now there are no flowers because it's too late in the season, it's already flowered, it's very disturbed here. But here and behind us we have about 90 individuals of the sword-leaf telegraph. So all through here as well, it's really been disturbed, and it's rained a lot, so it's all covered in mud. But there are, there's almost 100 plants in here. They're all tiny, tiny plants. They're all seedlings. They're probably about 4 or 5 years old, maybe 6 years old, something like that.
Why do Milan plant more? If it's a native species and it's typical, why don't they reinforce population?
Orchids are difficult to germinate.
Okay.
And I know because I'm the person that does it for the Lombardy region through the Native Flora Centre. And strangely enough, despite being a very common species, this is one of the most difficult ones to germinate. We've never found a method to germinate it. We can collect the seeds, we have a general method for terrestrial orchids, but it never works. We've tried lots of different methods, using symbiotic fungi, for example, or using acid to break the seeds and using different substrates. But this is one of the species that we've just never found a way to get to germinate. And I think for me personally, finding a group that's arrived spontaneously was a huge release of pressure, personal tension, because it was one of the species that I wanted to reinforce. And the fact that it's able to do it on its own means that I'm not necessary, which is good. It doesn't need me. Okay, so that's the original poplar that was here before the disaster. The single plant that wasn't destroyed or taken away. During the disaster, well, in the days immediately after the disaster, there were lots of animals, domestic animals. There were 3,000 animals that died because of the toxicity of the dioxin. And so there were lots of animals that were basically taken away and incinerated. The vegetation was cut first of all and then incinerated, and they left just one tree.
Why?
I'm not sure why. I think just to have one thing, not really symbolic necessarily, but to check how it survived. If even a big tree would be killed by the pollution, then it's a really bad sign. But it survived, and it's there.
This is a
Populus nigra. And we can actually go and see the trunk.
How old is it?
I'm not sure, but the trunk is very big. If I had to guess, I'd say it's over 100 years old, but I really don't know.
Oh yeah.
You can actually get down to it here. If somebody wants to come in here. It's full of hawthorn and brambles. It's good having a camera tripod because you can use it to get rid of the spiky plants. And there we have it, the one plant that survived the Seveso disaster.
What does it do? Make you stronger? It's like the tree from Avila. You know, the big tree.
But it cried, it's sad. It outlived everything else here. It's alone. It was
So
alone.
did the tree in Avatar?
So this butterfly meadow is over one of the containment tanks.
Oh my God.
It's under here, all the rubble is under here. And
they say don't judge a book by its cover.
So the grasses we can see are actually pretty typical of a lowland meadow. There's a grass called 𝗺𝗵𝗵𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃. There's dactylis glomerata and there's this Holcus lanatus, but the main one is 𝗺𝗵𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃, which we can see here.
Very typical.
Yeah, that's a dominant species in on rich soils. And the dactylis is an indicator of rich soils. We can see trifoliums, clovers, and various other things. So it's a nice nice meadow. A meadow, of course, means that it's mown, meadow mown, so that it's where it's cut, not grazed.
Yeah.
That would be a pasture.
They've
Butterfly.
planted this as well?
Yeah, it's all planted. Everything is planted. Everything has been, you know, the major formations have been managed, let's say. I mean, you do have these species coming in on their own, but it's the park that decides what's here, and they've decided to make a meadow, especially to favour the insects. So, butterfly meadow.
I think 𝗬𝗵 just wants to go in and walk in the meadow.
And like
Yeah.
So tell us, what do you think? What do you think it is?
Almost.
Okay, so why do you think it's almost?
Asymmetrical base.
The base is asymmetrical. Okay.
Serration.
Okay. How many side veins in the leaf?
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Minor.
Okay, almost minor. Can I just say, you made an interesting point that they did a good job, because it's very beautiful. So we've appreciated that it's not a natural woodland, but it is a beautiful park. It's an urban space. There are people from all of the towns nearby that come here and walk the dog. As an urban park, it works very, very well. As a natural woodland, no. But it does have natural elements, and there are some really, really nice things about it. So you can appreciate that it has its own purpose. The aim was not to restore a woodland. There was never a woodland here. It was houses and people and families that aren't here anymore. And so the aim was not restoration here. It was about doing something in the face of a massive disaster. And like you say, they've done very well to create something that is green and gives people green space in the city. And the other thing about it is that it's not an industrial incinerator for pollution, and we don't have lorries coming from all over Europe bringing pollution here. So they made a very good choice to do this.
Bravi.